6:04. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. So in consideration of the agenda for tonight's meeting, we really have one topic, and that's to cover articles of the amendment to the Torch Lake Township zoning ordinance. That is the only item that we plan today, although it should be a fairly meaty discussion. Any questions about the agenda? No.
I've got
Yes.
a couple, and I don't know if it necessarily applies to tonight or Wednesday, but between the two nights, when I was going through it, I kept referencing back to the definitions. So that's not one of the lists to go through, but I'd like to go through it. I think there could be some additional definitions to put in or some clarification of some of the definitions. And then that also had me thinking about the table of contents in general. And particularly when you get to that section 14, it's pretty confusing about what's back there. But I found them to be some pretty helpful definitions for me to go through it as others go through the ordinance and the different sections of the ordinance to have consistency between what's called out in the ordinance and the definition, because I found some inconsistencies. So that could be it could be just edits I send or we send to each other, but
Right.
I thought because we're editing the ordinances, we probably need to edit the definitions in section 14.
Absolutely. And I was just leaving 14 until the last meeting so that then we could make sure that they were all in there. But I don't know, does that work for you, or do you want to deal with 14 each time? Okay. Yeah. So we'll come back to 14. So keep your notes because that's perfect for items that don't line up, don't make sense, if something's missing that you'd like to find. And we'll put it all in that chapter.
You know, an example was like principal structure or principal building. It was called both things in section, might have been 5, for example.
Yeah.
It's some unnecessary confusion I think we can eliminate really easily just by rewriting some definitions.
Right. Yeah. And that's some of that work, like comparing some of those chapters, all the cross sections, not chapters, words, we go through too once you take your look and kind of do our final review of everything to make sure. So we'll double check that all the uses have definitions in our final review. We'll do all the cross-referencing. We double check that, planning commission is either capitalized or not capitalized throughout, those types of things. We kind of run that at the end to make sure everything's there. But I appreciate any of them that you do happen to notice as well. When we're going through, I mean, you don't have to bring them up tonight, but if you're like, hey, here's my typos and corrections, or make sure to take a look at this. I appreciate that as well.
So with that, though, should we, in our next meeting, specifically have us make sure we review the definitions before we come in here, and even if we have to go back to them later?
Well,
Probably
they're going to
sound like
be
a good
on
idea.
the agenda for the last time we reviewed, like that last meeting. So I think that if you could just, as you're looking at it, if you have any questions about what a word means, either mark it, because you'll be like, Sarah, do we need a definition for this? Or be sure to check to make sure the definition is what you think that word should be. And maybe just mark it in Article 14, and then we'll just talk about that. I mean, we could spend a whole meeting just talking about definitions, honestly.
Okay. I'm good with that. So with that, can I have a motion to approve the agenda as written for this evening? Have a second? Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So conflicts of interest. Does anyone feel they have a conflict of interest with anything in this agenda this evening? If not, there's no public here, so we won't have any public comments this evening. Do we have any correspondence?
No.
Okay. So let's move into the main item today. That's the draft zoning ordinance, Articles 1, 2, 5, 11, and 13. So Sarah, I guess I'll turn it over to you to just kind of walk us through each one, and then we'll just comment as we go.
Yeah, and that's what I'm kind of, I can do a kind of a brief overview about it and then just take any comments or questions. And I may just go, kind of 5 pages at a time for you to kind of say if you have any comments. Making the assumption you've all read through it and, have your items marked. So just kind of as background, this was a draft that, I worked on knowing the current ordinance and that state trying to correct some of the, any kind of legal errors, duplication, streamline. I didn't try to change too much policy in the document, although naturally there is some changes to that when you go through. In that it just happens, and this is a good time to implement some things that kind of are a thread throughout the whole document. That's easiest to address at this time. This document was reviewed in parts, different chunks by the subcommittee. So they went through, they took a look at it. So they've kind of had the first pass over on it. There's a couple of items which I have noted that are, the planning commission needs to talk about this. We're not even going to touch it. There are some spots where they said, here's our thoughts, let's put it in there and see what happens on that. But they kind of were more like an advisory, yeah, looks good, or we have concerns about this. Let's have the planning commission talk about it. And then also Steve Langworthy's had a look through it and provided some edits and thoughts and clarifications. And so his comments are incorporated into this document. That did happen after the subcommittee reviewed it, but before the planning commission got it. His was more for consistency items, some of those, and to try to clarify or, things that he's seen in his experience troubles with, but not like policy issues. And I would encourage you as you're reading through it to, if you have an issue with a section, to kind of try to look at it as like a policy and not wordsmith too much. So if you're finding a spot and you're like, I don't like how this is written, more kind of call, I can go back and see if I can make it better versus us spending hours here trying to figure out what this sentence needs to read like for that. And hopefully we'll get through the sections, but if we don't, we'll just push them to the next meeting. So I only want to spend maybe, an hour and a half or on this, 2 hours, depending on the discussion. You'll just get worn down and there's no reason to rush through it, to get it done. So we'll just spend a
I
little bit
do
of time.
like the process of not wordsmithing. The only thing I'd want to be cautious of is though, if somebody highlights something and the wording's not clear, you take it away, bring it back, and then we all look at it again
Yeah.
to make sure we have the discipline to go back to it.
Absolutely. And that's what I'll do. I'll mark it down and then we can call it out next time around so that we can go, okay, did I clear that up for you or did I make it worse? So, okay. So I'll get started then. Article 1, this one should be fairly quick, but this is just, title, purpose. This needs to be in the master plan. The purpose in this chapter was expanded from your current zoning ordinance to include some additional items as your purpose and why you were doing this. This section, all of these actually sections in this article are most important when we go to court and we have to defend why we have zoning, why we're regulating something, why it's important to us that we are here and doing this. Also, the relationship to the master plan, because your zoning does need to be based on your master plan. And I know that you've kind of seen that because we go back and forth. Well, we're working on the zoning ordinance, but we really need to work on the master plan. And that's why you'll see there's not a lot of big policy changes because we need to go back to the master plan to help us with some of those items that we really want to get done. But the zoning ordinance does need to be based on the master plan. So that's why we have that quick sentence in there about it. So if we do go to court, we can say this is why we did it. Any comments or questions on Article 1?
It's actually a mea culpa. I edited the original version. I'm going to run there and get the version that's already been gone through by the subcommittee. I don't have a lot of wordsmithing, but there are some sections that I want to see if they were addressed. I thought they were confusing as heck. And so you might see that as wordsmithing. So I'm going to run over there and get it, and I'll compare what I added it to what was done. And I may have a lot fewer comments, but there were some that I felt were, I had to read it 3 times before I understood what it was trying to say. And hopefully,
Are you talking about
Langworthy or the subcommittee cleaned that up. And again, I don't want to wordsmith. I don't think it changes policy, but I think of a resident trying to read it. I mean, I read stuff like this pretty often, and some of those sections were horrible.
Yeah.
Like they were backwards. And it was a 2-paragraph, 1-sentence thing. And could have been so simple to just say, public utilities do this, but it was, anyway, forgive me, but I'm going to take about 3 minutes, run over there, and then I can compare. I should have
Yeah.
made it.
Well, this October do you have the October 10th draft there
No.
or no? Oh, it's over there?
Yeah.
You had her print another one for you?
No, I'm wondering if it's in the packet.
Oh,
I didn't pick up my packet.
because we didn't print packets, because this was we printed it back in October. We haven't printed it since
Maybe.
October.
All right, maybe I did that. Let me see. I don't think so, though.
Okay.
I don't know what the date is.
Yeah, it's on the side. It runs down.
Oh, October 10th, 22?
Yep, that's the right version.
Oh, forget
So
it.
when we get to those paragraphs, let me know.
Okay,
So I had a couple
I
questions.
feel better.
In the first paragraph, the last sentence, just about jurisdiction. The current jurisdiction of other governmental entities shall not limit the jurisdiction of the township to regulate lands or activities within the township. So that one, to me, I get what it means, but I think of like the air park and the FAA and all the things we already had, we've talked about, paramotors and stuff like that. And that discussion has been brought up here. How does that relate into this? Because it seems like this says we can regulate that, but we had conflicting things around that.
Yeah, and so, I mean, we can still regulate the lands around the air park and even at the airport, but we just can't conflict with what the FAA tells us we can do. So like around the air park, you can't have buildings over a certain height, certain density requirements. So when we're zoning or doing master planning, we want to make sure that we're not putting that kind of where we can't, because the FAA would say you can't build that there.
Yeah, I guess the reason I bring it up is because that sentence seems as though the township has all authority to regulate everything, and I'm not sure that it does.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that point. I think that, I can add unless exempt by law or something if you want to the end of that paragraph, because there are exemptions, but they change all the time. And so that's where we're kind of going bold and saying we do everything, but unless there's something that proves
And I'm not,
otherwise.
obviously not an attorney. It's just more of like, if I were attorney and I was the other side and I'd see that and say, so you guys are completely out of scope before you even got into the document. And I would use that to say that, so that's all. It just seemed like it'd be something that somebody could pick at, so.
I had a similar comment. I put at the end, does this mean the township leads it all? Because it said concurrent. And understand what you're saying, Sarah, but again, if I'm a resident trying to build something, I'm trying to make a decision, do I go to the county for this? Is the township lead all? And maybe it's as simple as that, come to the township. And maybe you get direction on what the township does control or lead and what the county or some other agency might control, lead, Department of Health Services, whatever. Because it uses words like concurrent and, but shall not limit the jurisdiction of the township to regulate lands or activities, and that gets pretty broad.
That's the part where I was struggling.
I had a comment on the very first sentence, it was about, it's covered in section 1.3A, but it says provisions of this ordinance shall apply to all development. It really applies to a lot more than development. It does apply to the public health, safety, and general welfare. So that I saw it in A, I wrote it in, and then I saw it in A. I'm like, I guess it's covered, but it just seems again awkward. The ordinances are about a lot more than just development. But that's what it stated at the very beginning. So if you all feel it's covered under purpose to promote public health, safety, and general welfare, then I guess it's covered. But it just seemed odd that it started out with it's about development, because it's not just about development.
I can expand that a little bit.
I think that's a good comment. because this does kind of set the tone for everything.
Okay.
In the purpose, just, I mean, I think it's fine. It just seems though, in the master plan, it talks a lot about, or references a lot about the waters as a natural resource and the pristine nature of our lakes and everything. Seems like we should call that out here.
Under the purpose, add like a G that talks about the waters.
Yeah, it could be like a, yeah, I would even put it up number, like A, like between A and B or B and C. It's like health, land, water.
Okay, anything else?
Anything else in section 1 or article 1?
I thought A and B were great. It's wordsmithing, you told I did. C, instead of control sprawl, it's really guiding development, redevelopment, and maintaining the character, as opposed to controlling sprawl. I think these ordinances guide development, redevelopment.
I would like clarification on what is an appropriate trend of land? Trend and character of land? What is I don't understand what an appropriate trend of land would be.
I mean, kind of how it's developed, how it's been developed in the past, the area around it.
Okay.
Which section are you reading?
The F,
F, the last
Sure.
part of F.
Oh.
Can you restate what you had for C instead of control sprawl?
I put guide development, comma, redevelopment, and maintain rural, and then I put comma, northern Michigan character. Because so many things that come to us, we talk about, does it fit? And I think it's more than rural. But my main thing was to delete control sprawl. That doesn't feel like it applies here. Things more about guiding development and redevelopment as opposed to controlling anything. No, yeah, all right, that's kind of my point. That's what made me think of the, to fit our township as opposed to being more generic. Yep.
I think it makes sense.
Okay. Anything else on this page? Okay. Article 2, so Article 2, general provisions. These are typically.
I'm sorry, Sarah, real
Yes.
quickly, to go back to your comment about the appropriate trend and character of land. I read it again after her comments, and I agree with her that it's general and appropriate trends of land use and, changing character or something like that.
Okay. Okay. So Article 2, general provisions, is generally applies to all properties within the township. They're not specific to a certain district a lot of times. everybody wants to build accessory buildings. These are the rules for accessory buildings. These are your fencing regulations. So there's a little bit that's kind of very broad and general that we usually see in zoning ordinances. And then we kind of get into more specific items that a lot of it was pulled from your existing ordinance and brought over to this ordinance. So we've got the first couple of pages. Does anybody have any questions maybe on the first 2 pages? So up through section 2.10.
2 point, which one?
10, temporary buildings during construction. So it's page 16, 15 or 16. Any comments?
So just a statement, that first sentence under, or I'm sorry, the last sentence under 2.1, the ordinance must be read and applied as a whole. And that if there's in the sentence before that, it's about if there's any lack of cross-references, a little bit to what Bill brought up earlier with definitions and cross-references, because that's always tricky. I like this sentence, and it's a very powerful kind of catch-all. So the question is, was those 2 sentences taken from a previous version, or when I read those 2 sentences, I think those are important for like our attorney to review and say, yeah, that's the best wording we can have, because that could be 2 sentences we hang our hats on something if we were getting to an argument.
Yeah, let me mark it down to have Todd take a quick look at it. Okay. Anything else for 15, 16?
I had a couple comments on page 16 under 2.9 B and C. For B, it refers to if any damage is done to public property, the applicant's responsible. Where is it handled if they do damage to private property, their neighbor?
Well, we can't enforce on somebody else's property. So it'd be between them and their neighbor. I mean, we can put it in there, public or private, but I
That was
can't
my
go
edit.
after and enforce it.
It's saying the applicant's responsible. That's what my comment, but it was a question, is it public or private? I get that the township can have control if it's damage to public, or the county can. But if it doesn't, yeah. I'm
I'll throw
thinking
private in there.
more about to make you aware, if you damage your neighbor's property, you're responsible for that too. But if it doesn't apply, if that comment doesn't apply to the ordinance because it's policy, then I'd be right with that.
I'll throw it in there and see what the attorney says about it.
That would be more of a civil matter, wouldn't it?
Probably.
Yeah. But
The neighbors fight it out and the county gets uninvolved, so maybe private shouldn't be in
Go
there.
ahead and see what it says, right?
Right.
Good point.
okay. And item C.
And then C, the van says, or the applicant has made application to construct a new principal structure. Making an application, does that mean approved, an approved application? So you can have an application, and then I put, does it need to be built by a certain date? The whole thing is removal of a principal structure that will leave an accessory structure in the property shall not be allowed unless the accessory structure is also removed or the applicant has made application to construct a new principal structure. So saying, are we allowing demolition, but you leave an ancillary building even if you don't have an approved permit?
Yeah, we can change that to approved land use permit. This is a change. Currently, we don't allow you to keep an accessory building. If you demolish your house, you have to demolish everything. It causes,
It can be there for a while. That was kind of my point. Shouldn't you have an approved application
Yeah.
before you can demolish, as opposed to I submitted one, even
Right.
though it's not approved, I'm going to start to tear down everything except for the ancillary buildings. So I
so,
would just, my edit is change made to approved.
yep, approved land use permit. And I don't know what anybody thinks about this. But currently, like I said, you're required, if you demolish your house, you cannot leave an accessory building by itself on the property.
Right.
Which I think causes issues for some people because they don't want to demolish it. So this relaxes that and allows more opportunity for it. This also allows more opportunity for somebody to never build a house and only have a garage on their property. And that will happen in time. So typically, if they have a zoning permit, they will continue and build a house and there won't be an issue. Some townships, like in Milton Township, they make somebody post a bond or performance guarantee if they pull a permit to demo a house and not the accessory building. So they'd have to have a approved zoning permit for the house, but then they're also required to post performance guarantee. So then the township can go in and demolish it if they want to. Kind of works. I think that's a little bit more to require somebody to follow through. Sometimes it's also hard for the township to collect on that bond. So even if you get the money, you know, you have this bond, you have the bank, different things, it's still difficult to actually get to the end.
So I'm
the
trying to
resolution.
close that loophole, because what
Yeah.
this says right now is if I make an application, just filling it out, I can tear anything down, have an ancillary structure forever. So
I mean,
I
do
think
you
it's an
want,
approved application to construct a new principal structure, and I put built by, I don't know, 2 years from the application. I mean, that's the loophole that exists. It doesn't put an end date on when I actually build a structure, so I'm gonna have those ancillary buildings there for,
well, I mean, would you want to go as far as requiring a performance guarantee when they apply to demo
think-
it? I mean, what's the feeling?
Well, I think what Bill just said could work because
But what happens when I get to the end of 2 years?
But he's made an application, okay, but never,
Yeah.
it doesn't say if the application's approved or not. I could send an application tomorrow. So unless the applicant has received an approval on an application to construct a new principal structure within 2 years or something like that.
Right.
And then they always have the chance to go to a ZBA appeal if they get into the deal and can, they need
Well,
longer or
right.
something. Sometimes it takes longer to build a house.
I don't disagree with the comment about an approved zoning permit. I think that's a great catch. When they get to the end of the 2 years and they don't build, what do we
tear the
do?
other building down.
Right, so I think that we should put in there that, and then at the end of, when the permit expires, you're responsible to demolish your accessory building. You comfortable
works.
going that strong on that?
Yes.
Well, sometimes things happen,
Mm-hmm,
and you don't get it done in that, it happened to me.
mm-hmm,
Okay.
mm-hmm,
And so you have to pull another permit.
right,
I wouldn't say if you don't do it in that 2 years, but you still have, I somehow.
Get an extension.
Somehow in the wording and the completion of, I mean, I had a husband die in the middle of building, so
right.
it didn't happen in the 2 years, so I had to do some more permitting.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess in the end, somebody just keeps pulling a permit, you know, and then they're never out of compliance, because you can come in and your permit expires, you pull another permit, and you just kind of keep playing that game as well. Yeah. I mean, I kind of like the performance guarantee, because what happens is either by the time, you know, if somebody doesn't build and they, you know, you send them a letter and say you need to demolish this, they go, I don't have the money to demolish it. You know, I don't have the money to build. You can't find them, you know, something's happened. But also sometimes performance guarantees are hard to collect on. But I don't know, you know, if it's worth a shot to put it in there to see in case that happens. I mean, because I have one right now that they were supposed to build a house. They ended up building just an accessory building. And now they just keep coming in and, you know, pulling permit for a house that they never build type of thing. But, okay, let me beef this language up and see what you guys think.
So I have a quick question. I've never
Sure.
known, other than commercially, like performance bonds on private
Yeah,
entities. Does that exist?
yeah, I've received some from banks.
Okay.
Yeah, I did just a couple months ago in Milton for, it was out in the ag district. They tore the house down. We're gonna build a new house and wanted to leave one of the ag buildings, and they got a bond from the bank. I don't know if it's the construction company that went in and got it, Or if it was the individual, you know, that part, I'm not as particular about, as long as it says that if you don't build your house, the township collects.
Whatever way there is to close the loophole without making it harsh,
Okay,
because it can be that a contractor just leaves.
right.
And so getting extensions to the permit, something reasonable, they come and say, hey, here's what happened. You know, I'm not, you know, I'm not
Yeah.
just abandoning this, but here's what happened. I need an extension or performance bond. I'd make it easy, but I would close the loophole best I can somehow.
Okay. I'll see what I can come up with. Okay, anything left on page 16? Okay, then moving on to 17, 18.
I thought 211A was a double negative. So that's when I had to read through. No basement, you know, blah, 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 not installed. I just changed no to any. Any basement, cellar, accessory structure, recreational vehicle, tent, or mobile home not installed according to the requirements of the ordinance or other structure may be used as a residential dwelling. But starting with no and then adding not installed, it was a do loop in my head.
Sure.
Number 7 under D. The word, well, we don't wordsmith, I think, but-
Right, but if there's, go ahead.
If we want the septic installed, a shall seems like a good choice there. Instead of must.
Shall's a requirement, so may is it could happen, a shall is, it has to happen. So same as must.
Okay.
So,
212B,
yep,
I think the word setback is required after the word yard.
at the end,
Yeah. Does not project more than 2 feet into a required yard. I mean, by definition, every overhang could extend 2 feet into a yard.
so you want it into a required setback?
I think that's what it's supposed to mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same, but yeah, required. Let me do it this way. Something that is different in this section is item D. Item D allows for a 2-foot overhang into your setback. Currently, all of our setbacks are measured to the eave, to the drip edge. So this is measured to essentially foundation instead. But if you put on a 4-foot cantilevered porch, you know, overhang, you gotta take 2 feet off of that to meet your setbacks.
I kind of like it the way it is now.
You like it to the drip edge?
Yeah.
I mean, the drip
Because-
edge is just difficult to measure to, like if you're out there physically measuring, because you're like, okay, you know,
I
it lines
agree.
up.
I tell you where it's a sensitive item is because I assume it's probably the same on Torch, but certainly on the bay, especially when you have to meet setbacks by not just township, but also like Eagle.
Mhm.
And you're looking for everything you can to not have to put your house some quarter of a mile back. So any 2 feet is 2 feet. Could be helpful.
Mhm.
And I don't think it necessarily restricts anything. I mean, it's just a little bit farther, so you don't have to, you know, if you want a certain aesthetic look to your house, you don't have to move it that much farther back from the water.
So you like measuring the foundation?
No, I like having it, that the 2 feet of the additional 2 feet in the overhang can actually go into the setback.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
way it's
you like
worded.
that change?
yes.
Okay. That's a little, I mean, I would say it's more common to measure to foundation than to drip edge in a lot of ordinances, but there are a lot of that measure to drip edge. So there's no right way to do it. It's just, like I said, kind of on the ground, if you're trying to go out and verify something and you have a survey line and you can measure the foundation a lot easier than trying to guess exactly where the eave is, because you can't get up that high a lot of times, so. Or they don't have a roof on yet and you're trying to figure out, you know, what it looks like. I mean, I guess you can take off 18 inches from whatever you put on there, but
And the other thing that, and I agree, I totally get what you're saying, but when they have a plan to come in, they should show the plan and should have a cross-section. And if it looks like it's cut, you can see
yep.
and look at it there, and then you can probably
Yeah.
get a sense for it, unless they're violating the plan, which you got a different problem anyway.
Right. And I think this is one of those constant struggles because everybody is like, well, I usually measure to the foundation. And you're always like, nope, we're to the eave. And it's just one of those constant education conversation situations. And I don't know that the 2 feet, I think it can offer opportunities, but I don't see the negative side to it. But somebody surely could make an argument, I'm sure, about it. Okay. Then moving on to, I guess, was 18 in there? So 18, 19?
Yeah, I actually have one last comment on, it's section 212. The entry sentence, added the word improvements or before structures to read permitted encroachments and required yard setbacks should be limited to the following improvements or structures. Because not everything listed under its structures, and that's why I kept going back to the definitions. And it just doesn't meet, there's an inconsistency there. So that is indeed wordsmithing, but some of the things listed are their improvements, and they're not structures by the definition of the ordinance.
So what are you thinking is
Where is that? I'm trying to follow.
it's that opening
The
line?
sentence right below 2.12 permitted yard encroachments. It's referring to everything that's structures. So we can either tighten up the definition of structure back in the definitions and leave it as is, but I just added improvements or before the word structures.
Let me look at structures.
I
the
like your change
definition-
because it even limits, it even refers to improvements underneath, so.
So the definition of structure is on page 191. I know we were going to come back, but I think this isn't important because this is going to change a lot of edits throughout the document or,
Yeah, it's one of 3 or 4 words that I kept looking up because it's used a lot. And I read I read everything as a resident because I am one. And I'm thinking, what is a structure? and What's not a structure? Because so many things have to do with about the structure.
yeah. So what are you thinking is an improvement that's not a structure? Do you have an example to help me?
Is an eave a structure?
Well, an eave is a part of the structure. So a structure says anything constructed or erected, whether temporary or permanent, the use of which requires location
Is a
on
gutter a
ground.
structure? It's part of a structure. It's a bit, I mean, everything could apply depending on how you rationalize it. Again, I was really trying to read it as a resident who once every 10 years needs to look at this ordinance and try to save them some confusion. Because I think all the time folks are doing different things with their gutters and I wouldn't consider it to be a structure, but it's on a structure.
Right. It's attached to a
I'm
structure.
just saying, just by the way it's written, it shall be limited to the following structures, and it lists a lot of things that people wouldn't consider structures, nor would I.
Well, and then it also says the highest elevation of the surface of the improvement. So it's,
That's where I got the improvement from,
Yeah.
just to try and have it be a broader coverage. I don't think it changes policy. Again, it might be a minor thing, but I think it will clear up some confusion from residents that read it. And maybe from builders too, but I doubt it.
That's not what I want to do.
I'm not dying on the hill on this one.
Okay. Let me make a comment for structure. That may be an attorney question. I mean, that's a pretty standard definition for structure. So let me check to see if he's like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. Or if it's something that he's like, well, I see your point. So I appreciate the comment because that's why you're here to tell me that I've been reading ordinances for too long. Okay. So anything else on 17? Okay. Then moving on to 18.
I just had a quick question on 213B. I assume that same, is that a state law requirement that you, or is that just our policy, or is that?
It's just policy related to chimneys, but some of it ends up in the building code. So some chimneys, depending on this or that, my example is like a wood boiler. You know, if somebody puts in a wood boiler, they put on a short stack, it causes issues, but if they can put on a taller one, it helps their neighbors depending
Yeah,
on
I was actually, if I
I
said
know.
C, I meant B.
Oh.
I had the same. I just wrote really no limit with a question mark
Mm-hmm.
is what I wrote there. Is there a limit?
That's case law.
Maybe we put it, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then we end up arguing about if something's a religious institution or not, which is also there's case law about that too. Done with 18.
Section 214C is horrible. It's written by an attorney for only an attorney to understand. I think you take the very first part of the sentence, the erection, construction, alteration, maintenance, and operation by utility agencies, that added agencies, or municipal departments or commissions, then skipped all the way down to shall be permitted as authorized or regulated by laws and ordinance of township, and then bullet point. It goes into 3 different levels of tangent to describe what it means by that before it gets to the real end of the original subject. And I really read that 4 times to understand what it was trying to do. It tries to list all the things that could be altered or maintained by utility agencies or municipalities before it gets to the point. So if I'm the only one who got confused, even after reading 4 times, there was no need to edit it. I just think there's a simplified way to make that statement with bullet points of all the things like underground gas, electrical, stream, water distribution, transmission system, collection, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes to the other tangent with other similar equipment such as, I mean, it was horrible. Written by an attorney for only an attorney to understand, I think.
Could it be as simple as just taking the part that reads shall, moved it way up to the beginning, and then just, I think is what you were
Right.
saying, Bill, such as, and then list them all? So
And I
that
do
the
believe it
heart of
means
the sentence is
utility
at the top.
agencies, not utilities, because the first time I read it, I thought it meant about the pipes. It's utility agencies or municipal departments or commissions shall be permitted as authorized. And then if we wanted to list the examples of the things we're trying to refer to, we can. Put in the end of the sentence. That's a really long one sentence. 9 lines down from the top of the subject. I thought it made it really hard to understand. And then while I'm on, a question on D, are telecommunication towers not essential services? In my head, I'm thinking they probably are, even to our real essential service providers, but it seems to be exempt based on D.
Yeah, they can be exempt and require their own approval process under law. I mean, you're welcome to say they're an essential service, but then they would,
Yeah, I wasn't sure what the
Essentially-
definition was of essential services, but
yeah,
Well, I interpreted it as things that we could choose to not,
right.
more easily choose not to allow, and so I was kind of like the way it was. Because I worry in particular, obviously antennas and towers and wind turbine generators, and because we have such good wind here. So,
You know, for item C, I'm gonna see if,
I just suggest look at it. I think it needs to be rewritten the way
yeah,
my comment edit is one way. If there's probably a better way, but in general, those 9 or 10 lines of text are pretty confusing and don't need to be. The point is pretty simple. The way it's written is not.
yeah.
yeah,
We've had there's lots of arguments over what is a essential service.
That was a different comment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I get that. So that's why I'm like, well, maybe we can just take that out. And then I'm like, well, maybe we really need the list. That's where I'm at. I mean, I'm fine with reorganizing the sentence. But I'm just wondering, or if it needs to be there, it could just be in the definition potentially, and then you don't have to worry about it
That's why I
there.
made a
And
comment at
so,
the beginning about definitions. Some
Yeah.
things could be cleared up if it's,
yep, I got a note here to compare it to the definition and take a look at if that's something we can make easier.
okay.
Anything else on 18?
Just a question. So for item D, so these are regulated elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
What section are those in and when do we, so we're going to come back to a chapter that touches on these?
They're in
specific-
Article 6.
6, okay.
So they're in Article 3, so they tell you the approval process in each district in Article 3, but the specific regulations for what they need to turn in and all of that is in Article 6.
I got one last comment. To be honest, the last time I sort of nitpick at structure, but even between 215 and 216 is called a principal structure or principal building. And in the definition, it's called a principal building. When we refer to a structure being a lot of other things like a gutter, and then once in a while we mean is an actual building that you go in like this one, I think that needs to be cleaned up. It's either a principal structure or a principal building. It shouldn't be both. And when we refer to a lot of things as structure, I think that's an easy way to clean it up and just call it consistently principal building when we mean the actual building,
Okay.
like the definition has.
So that was for 216, that's where that comment was?
I believe 216 is written correctly. It's 215, no lot may contain more than one principal structure. I think that should say principal building. Because back in section 14, that's what the definition of principal building is.
Okay.
The word structure, since it means so many things, that's why I'm suggesting the
No, that's a good point.
change there. When a structure is also a patio, as an example.
Yeah.
Not that we've had any things around patios.
Okay. Anything else on 18? Moving on to 19. So when you're looking at this accessory buildings here in these regulations, these are regulations that apply to all accessory buildings. And then when you get into Article 3, if you haven't read through that yet, you'll see related specific to that district, the accessory regulations. So like size or height or location setbacks. So instead of putting them all in one spot and having some chart that says in this district you can do this, we've moved them all to the district themselves. So when you read this without reading that, you're like, where's the rest? It's there. It's just not there yet. Okay. Moving on to 20, page 20. I'm wondering how everybody's feeling about power generators, if they want to have regulations or not have regulations about generators in the zoning ordinance. There's currently there's no language. We would treat them kind of as an accessory structure. Just if somebody came in off the street, if they even come in, most of the time people just put them in wherever, kind of like your air conditioner condenser.
I'm thinking of putting one in and I think it made sense. I was looking at it, I'm like, yeah, and I didn't really even think about it before, but it should be, especially because depending on where it is and the noise.
Mhm.
I mean, now this doesn't address that part of it, but
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of light on being too restrictive on it. I mean, if you wanted to put something additional in there. I mean, I think the important thing here is that it's a backup generator. This is not your primary use, primary energy producer on your property.
Right.
It's backup
I
generator.
think it covers it very well. I mean, most people that are gonna spend the money on a generator are not gonna wanna put it someplace unless, I mean, they're gonna try and put it in a good spot.
Okay. Okay. Anything else on page 20?
You say on 19 or on 20?
20. Do you need to go back to 19?
Yeah, I also thought it was really well written. It was B6 where it talks about selling to the utility company. And then I went back and looked at the beginning of 217 before A. It says the primary purpose is energy for on-site consumption and calls them personal solar energy systems. So it seemed like to me that if the primary purpose is on-site, but then the last section talks about selling to utility companies.
Okay. Let me clarify that. I think that the intent is to, if there is some excess, you can sell it, but the intent is not to.
Yes,
put it in
whenever I
just to
read
sell
something
it.
primary purpose, what's a secondary purpose? Secondary purpose might be to sell it to utility company, just not covered at the beginning. I was kind of surprised it was at the end. I thought the ordinance was going to read as this is really for personal consumption only, but it's not because you can sell it. It just wasn't addressed at the beginning.
Yep. I can clarify that. Okay. 20. Twenty-one. I mean, I don't know how many, well, Laura, you might be the sole one that was around when they made a bunch of changes to the fencing section in the past. No? Was it? So this one that causes us a lot of issues is number C, well, letter C, under 220 fences, C. For waterfront lots, fencing along the side property line shall not be solid and shall possess 40% or more opacity within the waterfront setback. We added within the waterfront setback because there's, the side is your whole side and you kind of cut out a lot. That's how I would like to apply it if we're going to go down that you can't have a solid fence. Also, there's a lot of places that don't allow any fence in the water side setback. So this is kind of generous to actually allow even, something that's up to 40% in your water setback. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts, comments, questions. I know just the previous planning commission spent a lot of time working on fences, but if there's something we need to change, we need to deal with it. Fences that's one of our constant phone calls in the office. So we always struggle with it, mostly because the current section is difficult to stumble through. So hopefully this will help clear it
So
up.
in this particular instance, adding the 40% opacity requirement within the waterfront setback, so that's something that's new.
The language that says within the waterfront setback, right now it's the side. They can have a fence in that area. The fence can be, but we're saying that and only the part that's in the waterfront has to be
40%.
right. Everything else could be a solid fence. But somebody could run the fence to the high water mark as drafted here.
That's a problem. Well, I don't think you can do it on the bay anyway.
Yeah, with the bluff.
It would be an issue more on Torch.
So the question's probably to yourself then. I really don't know, depending on what the calls are about. If
Yeah.
that's what the constant calls are about, what do you think, if anything, should change in here? To me, the calls are like taking a survey, right?
Yeah.
So if you've been getting, here's 2 or 3 things that are constantly a problem, let's fix that here.
Yeah.
But I don't know what those calls are.
I mean, personally, I think that, well, I'm conflicted. I don't like fences to the high water mark. That bothers me.
Yeah, I don't either. I think I don't live on Torch, but speaking on Torch, if you had a fence that ran all the way down to the water, seems like that could be disruptive to other people's viewing and things of that nature. But
At the same time, you have no right to view over your neighbor's property. The courts have said that too. But we all want to look over our neighbor's property, right? And so we're trying to protect that and help that. So part of me is like, don't allow them in that setback at all. But then you have a lot of people that are built at 50 feet back from the high water mark, and that's kind of that's the yard everybody uses. And how do you let them use that yard and either have some privacy or keep the dog in, or so that's why I'm conflicted. I don't have a good answer. I guess my biggest concern would be going to the high water mark with a fence. So maybe you split the difference and say you have to be 10 feet from the high water mark. I don't know. It all depends on how we define what a high water mark is, which is conversation to still be had here. If it's vegetation, if it's an elevation, it's a water's edge. I mean, if it's right, if it's an elevation, there could be times when somebody's fence would be in the water if you pick an elevation, depending on. So we can come back to this, I think, once we define what your waterfront setback looks
maybe we
like.
should come back to it. Again, from my vantage point, I tend to agree with you, but I also realize that my view is altered because I live on the bay as opposed to Torch, and it's definitely different.
Okay. And I'll ask Jackie too if she has any ideas, just because I deal in some of the phone calls. I know she lets me handle some of the hard stuff, but she may have a little bit better on that too.
Were you saying that right now, today, it can go all the way to the high water mark? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Although I am gonna
Maybe I'm
double
The way
reading
check.
it's
this wrong.
worded.
No side lot fence, gate, or screen shall be placed closer than 50 feet from water's edge or high water mark.
What section is that in?
227-2.
Okay. So I guess I'll have to look further. Let me check back on that. Because then maybe it's more with D, so it talks about side lot fences of 4 feet in height. So, this is in your current ordinance. So let me just read the section. Talks about when a residential lot borders a lake shore, a side lot fence shall not exceed 4 feet in height and shall be constructed of see-through material. So only on the lakes can your sides only be 4 feet high, but everywhere else they can be 6 feet high. But that's going to be in Article 3 that we deal with that. Let me circle back to that. Let me check with Jackie. Okay. Moving on then. Anything else on 21? 22?
I had a question on 21.
Sure.
On page, or Article 2.22A, says if no nuisances, how do we define a nuisance? The very last word there on the page, on page 21. a hazard, blocking of views certainly, but a nuisance, one person's nuisance may be
Yeah.
another person's pleasure.
That's I mean, it's pretty broad as a word. Makes me think that it might be in the current one. I mean, to me, it kind of just reads as a collect-all, like, I don't know what that nuisance is gonna be, but potentially it could have something for that, but I'm also okay with saying, just leaving it to hazards and blocking views. Or I'm okay
Yeah.
taking it out. I don't know that I care too much either about if it's in the side yard or the rear
Nobody
yard.
else has
or
a
where-
problem with it, I'm okay. It just seemed like it could be disputed.
It's one of those things that could be interpreted really broadly. I thought the definition for that happened to be pretty well written. I circled it, but
Yeah.
a nuisance to you might not be to me.
Right.
It's I had one question on 222B. It talks about travel trailer, vehicle shall not exceed 30 days, shall not be connected to utilities, and then it just says a zoning permit is required, and I said, for what? It seemed like an odd place to put it. What's a zoning? It either gets stricken or it needs to be spelled out. What do you need a zoning permit for if you're saying, here's what you can't do? So that was my question, permit for what? And then this shall be for personal use and not rented or leased to an occupant. I'm thinking about, what's it around the corner of 88 Cellar 1914? I think they have one there that you can, should it be allowed for commercial use, for example, to have it rented for more than 30 days?
Yeah.
My main question was about why is a zoning permit required? But it had me think about commercial uses for it because I think we have someone, at least one property that does that.
I just don't like 222. I don't like what we have today either, but.
I know. Well, this
I
is,
really,
this
really don't like
language in
it.
item B is exactly what's in your current zoning ordinance because the planning commission had just got done doing an amendment to put it in there. Not to say that it's right. I mean, it was kind of a niche zoning amendment for certain things. This is another topic that is a constant phone call in the office. So can I stay in a trailer? Can I stay in my RV on the property? Who can stay in it? So the issue is, does it have to, is it an accessory use to your property? Do you have to have a house there or can you put it on vacant land? That's one of the first ones. How long? And then is a permit required? I would say there's other parts in the ordinance that would say a permit's required, but to be crystal clear with this one, that's why that's in there. And then the last one is, can people put them on their property and either rent them or let someone else stay in there? Or let someone else bring their camper onto you own the property, your friend wants to come and stay on your property. Is that something that's permitted?
I think all that's well written. It seems like it deals with some of the issues we want to try and guide. It just needs a zoning permit ought to be for what? Particularly in B, it just seems out of place.
And I could break up B. To me, B should be like B item shall meet the following. One, type of thing to just reword it and restructure it.
I'm not sure I follow that. So I think B is great if you just,
Do you need more explanation for
one, you can't live in it for more than 30 days in a calendar year. You can't connect it to water and power and all of that. The zoning permit's required. So that I can?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So I
Yeah,
could say
that
with,
statement in there is in the middle of, here's some things that you can't do with your trailer. I get it. The zoning, and a zoning permit's required. To do what? So I can live in it more than 30 days? So I can hook it up to water and
Okay.
You
power?
could almost just strike that unless you're applying.
Drop it.
yep, I see. Yep.
Does anyone actually like it?
I'm sorry?
Does anyone actually like what it's saying? Like,
Right.
so,
I mean,
so you're cool with nobody can ever bring their camper and park it there overnight?
I'm for that. I just, when it says a zoning permit is required, it says, okay, I can go get one, and then I can do these things. But if that's not what we want, then we should take out a zoning permit required, or explain what it's required for.
I understand what you're saying.
Because it could be interpreted as required to not hook it up, to not live at 30 days.
Yeah.
So Laura, I'm confused. What are you asking?
I just think it's crazy that you can't have somebody come and stay at your house overnight. Maybe like once this month, maybe next month, it's summer, we live here and it's awesome and everybody wants to come and enjoy Torch Lake or whatever. And the, Barnes Campground's great, but it's full and you've got a yard. And I know, some people live on the lake and it's more annoying
Yeah.
in some zones than others. But it just blows my mind that I couldn't have somebody come and stay, for a couple nights once a month in my yard and maybe hook up to my electric.
So this says you can for 30 days. Is that enough? Is that your,
Yeah, so this is like a 30-day permit. So.
that's what the permit, oh,
Mhm.
So,
So you can get a permit for 30 days in a year to have somebody stay in your property. So if you pick the month of June,
And
now
it's
I-
your own camper.
Right.
It's not theirs.
right.
right.
So if you want somebody to come in August and you have a
personal
permit
use.
for
Interpret it
June,
That way.
I didn't either.
yeah.
So,
Maybe we should reword it.
So Laura,
We're struggling.
I agree, so somebody's out, they're traveling around, they come, they park overnight or
Sure.
I'm good with that too. I mean, yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, but you can't do that.
Yeah, I know, I
Yeah.
think that's a little overstep.
Yeah.
I mean, I get some of it, what we wrote down here. But if I have a friend that wants to come and they park in my driveway for 2 days, just on their way south of Florida or something out of UP, let's figure it out. A lot of times it's your surroundings, right? So you're gonna know yes or no how everybody feels, but I don't have a problem with that either. I mean, it's temporary where they drop in and they're out of here. They're
Yeah.
not gonna squatters' rights and come in and hang out. Didn't Belgrade Village have an issue with parking trailers on drives? I
I
think.
don't know.
No. So is everybody comfortable with that? Is there a time when it becomes too much? Is there a time when Laura's friends show up every weekend and are camping in her yard? Is that too much for you?
Laura's friends?
Yeah, I know, specifically only hers. I'm sorry to call you out.
That's fine. That's fine.
But, if your neighbor had friends that came up every weekend and they brought their camper up and they put it in their driveway every weekend all summer long, are you okay with that?
With a camper,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I can go over the top.
Yeah.
I mean, it can, if it's every weekend, if it's day in, day out, that's just not fair to your neighbors.
So we've already got can't exceed 30 days in calendar year for your trailer.
Right.
Would it be reasonable to state the same thing for a visiting trailer? And have the same 30 days, because it implies that there'd be some level of enforcement anyway.
I think your example's a good one though, because if we have the 30 days in the calendar year, that's 15 weekends that they could come every weekend and park their like clockwork through the summer. So the question is, are we okay with that or not?
I'm a little conflicted with all of it. I guess my question would be well, first of all, I'm pretty sure there's people that are not abiding by this period, and living in units, for a long period of time. So it feels disingenuous a little bit to me. But the other, I guess I'd like to hear from members, what are we trying to prevent? So if somebody has friends and they come every weekend and they're respectful and they commune with their neighbors and, I have extra bedrooms, but maybe somebody doesn't, and they can have people come and go. If they're treating everyone well, what difference is it if they're in a trailer or if they're in their house?
That's a good point.
So I'm kind of,
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing, because I know for a fact, there are people very close to me where I live, that every summer, there's 4 or 5 motorhomes the whole summer, and another neighbor lives in a trailer. I've had people living in a trailer for a whole year,
I think that's what it's trying to prevent. And so that's why I said
Well,
that
the way
enforce,
it is, isn't.
that's why I'm saying it's implied that there'd be enforcement already in the 30 days for your trailer. So enforcement is key to that. But I think that's what it's trying to prevent is,
But do we have, if we're not gonna enforce it, I guess we need to be genuine about our whole approach to it. If we're not gonna enforce it, then
Yeah, I mean, most of our enforcement is complaint-based for any of that, so none of the neighbors have complained about it, or it's just not on our radar as an area. You know, Bob does, our enforcement officer, you know, he drives up kind of the main road here and tries to hit some of the main things, but he's not driving down every road to see every violation out there. The hardest thing with the temporary occupancy for the travel trailer is to prove that somebody's actually living in it. You know, just because it's plugged in doesn't mean that somebody's living in it. Typically, you know, if they have some sort of sewer septic situation hooked up, you know, it does, but a lot of people don't do that. So then it's somebody kind of seeing it at night with the lights on in it, keeping track of days, what that looks like. I mean, we issued a ticket to somebody that's living in their camper, and, you know, the judge upheld it, that they were in violation of the ordinance and they needed to move their camper or get a permit, because he didn't even have a permit for it.
so my motion as a policy is to state the same thing for a visiting trailer at 30 days that we have for a owner trailer as a policy, and enforcement is a separate issue that ought to be considered. But for this ordinance, I think if we think it's a reasonable thing to do, I go with 30 days only because we already have 30 days for your trailer. So you have a trailer, 30 days, you get people staying at no more than 30 days in a calendar year. One of your buddies comes, you can do that 30 days also.
So are you thinking consecutive, or you're just thinking 30 total?
30 total. I was thinking to apply the same policy to a visiting trailer as you would have to an owner's trailer. But that's my soft motion to at least start with. It's not addressed at all. If we want to address it, we do that and go with 30 days and see what
Okay.
y'all think of that.
I'm fine with not just your own, but visitors. But I do think your buddy's going to stop by on the way to Florida. Did you find out in time to go get your permit? That to me is kind of, yeah,
It's like, hey, you just passing through, oh, it's 10 o'clock at night, come on in.
Right. Yeah. And then not being able to hook up
Yeah, and
to
I don't
power.
have facilities to run their sewer line.
Right, but-
Water and power.
Right. Yeah. But you can't do that under here.
But they're not gonna run their air conditioner unless they have a generator, and that's gonna be noise, and then we don't. Anyway.
So what do you think for the visitors trailer?
I think it's a mood issue.
I mean, most people that are coming in,
This shall be not rented or leased to occupant. Just move. So, personal use, what exactly does that mean? I mean, it's got,
Right.
we've got to own and title, what if somebody dropped it off and I'm gonna try it out for the weekend because I'm
Right.
online? You know, how do you guide them?
okay. Well, let me work through some of that language then for that. As far as permit for your visitor trailer,
I mean, the rented or leased, I think is a big deal, because you don't want people to sign, essentially renting.
Did we say?
I mean, and the reason that it's for personal use and not rented or leased, and it's supposed to be your own, is so that someone doesn't come along and own 5 trailers and then put them on 5 pieces of property and then let their friends stay in them for a weekend, is the reasoning for that. Or actually, it's the other way around. It's 5 friends show up and they get to camp on each one of your 5 outlots for a weekend, and it's your property. Is the reason that it's in there, is to try to, because most people don't own 5 trailers, you know, so if you bring your own, you know, your friends.
Did we say somewhere that it has to be on the same?
It doesn't say that it needs to be on a property that has a house. So this This, as you read it, would just be, you can put it on a vacant parcel.
And
So if you had concerns about that, maybe the correction would be it has to be on with a dwelling. You can have a camper, and then maybe we don't care as much who owns that camper. And then that would kind of, but then it comes back to, would they need a permit for that? So if you're doing, 2 nights at a time, is that something that we need to track in some way? Or is it something that you just say, hey, if your neighbor's abusing it and the trailer's been there for 2 months, you come in and then we start
That's what I
enforcement?
think you do.
Yeah,
Because the 1 or 2 days that somebody's gonna stop in, you can't release that.
yeah. And I think that's what happens right now. Somebody comes in for 2 days, your neighbors don't call, nothing happens, we don't know about it. Right. I think there's a lot of that happens, but we do have this section, so somebody should be going under that. So if I were to say 30 days in a year, you don't need a permit. I'm not going to put you don't need a permit, but the policy is there's no permit required. Has to be where there's an existing dwelling. It's an accessory use to your primary dwelling.
I think that's good.
Let me work on that language because we'll come back to it. So then you can kind of think about it, see
Sounds
some
good.
examples in the community maybe of what might apply. So, okay.
Here we go.
Okay. Sorry that took so long to get through that part, but it's a big topic. That goes with the fences, so. Okay. Anything else on this page, page 22?
Just 2.23, outdoor storage. Now, seems like I can remember there was some concerns raised when we were doing a special use permit for a place here right in the Torch Lake Village area around stuff being stored associated with the business. So I guess my question is, it seems like it's fine to me wording wise, but I'm calling into question because it was a hot button and they could see where it could be a hot button in the future.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, you cannot have any outdoor storage unless in Article 3, which would be only in your commercial districts, we would allow outdoor storage.
So when you say commercial, what about village business? Is that?
Yeah, village business.
Okay, as well.
And I'd have to go and look in Article 3 to see. I'm assuming we allow outdoor storage with a special use permit in village business in our commercial district, which gives you a little bit more power to do all the screening and the components based on where the use is.
So is that an example of where something should be referenced? See Article 3? And that comment could apply to other subsections? Or does that get way too confusing? People, if you've got to read another section to be able to,
I'm conflicted on referencing other sections because, we do reference Article 3, except we're allowed in Article 3 here.
okay.
Because that's about the time you move something and then all your cross references are off. It is very user friendly when you reference the when you do the cross reference, but I guess I found long term that usually it causes more problems than it helps. And we do reference, I'll have to look. Let me double check that's because in Article 3 we do reference other sections. That's kind of the only section that in the table. I don't know if they're in there right now, but we reference cross sections. But this section should be mentioned in Article 3 back to 2.23.
Okay.
You would think if you're referencing it in both places to start, if you go to change anything, then you should, yeah.
Yeah, as long as it's in both, but I'll double check because I think there's more outdoor storage language actually in Article 6 when you're actually using that use, but that's for a different day. Okay. Ready to move on to page 23?
Yep.
I'm sorry
Anything?
to keep picking on
Oh.
this one on the outdoor storage. I think I've read this too many times and I'm getting tired here, but storage of materials or goods to be sold at retail or used as services is prohibited except where allowed in Article 3, which would probably be the village business, special use stuff. So then the next sentence is all allowed outdoor storage. So this is anybody, this is an R1, right? When we say all allowable or allowed outdoor storage, so at my house right now, must take place in the rear or side yard screen. Okay. Okay, I'm just making sure that. Okay, I'm good with it.
Okay. Page 23, other than the missing section to right to farm act under 2.29, any other comments?
That was interesting under 2.31 on marijuana.
Yeah, so,
Michigan's the only one that uses that still.
yeah.
That's felony. J
Yeah.
and H are both correct.
So I believe this is different from our current ordinance. Sorry. Let me double check. Because the current ordinance, oh no, let me look at it this way. I think goes into a lot more detail with the caregiver. So at the beginning, when this law first came into effect, everybody really tried to regulate where it happened, how it happened, home occupation permits and all of that. And it's kind of worked its way through the courts and all, that one, it's because it has the medical component, you run into issues with like HIPAA violations and things like that. So this is much more streamlined. It's like you comply with state law and it is what it is. Not requiring you to get a permit for it. People don't get permits for it. We're not telling you which district. It's an accessory use to your home. It's your business. So I hope you're comfortable with that. Okay.
I've got a counter question on chickens, 228. The
Yes.
second paragraph, property is a minimum of 200 feet wide. Shouldn't that be a minimum lot dimension? Doesn't mention deep, it could be 40 feet this way, 200 feet that way. It just seemed ambiguous. 200 feet wide, which is the width? So I wrote down, should it be minimum acreage or minimum lot dimensions or something? Because you could have a 10-foot wide by 400 feet long and by 400 feet width is met.
Actually, there were some of those right over here on Bay Colony Road, those
It
are.
just seemed like an odd, when everything else had, minimum
Little
at
bitty
5
lots you could
acres
put
for personal use.
Yeah. So the wide is intended to be along the road, so your front lot line. This is from the existing ordinance, this language, but we can clarify that. I want to double check that it's along the road. The reasoning is because most of the lake lots are smaller than 200 foot wide, honestly. I mean, because that's zoned R1, but if you have a large enough, wide enough lot on a lake, you could do it. Where it doesn't have that minimum requirement would be the only reason.
I don't have a problem with minimum requirement. I'm just wondering if every wide
Yeah,
is defined the same by everybody.
I'm going to double
The
check
40
that. I
feet,
put a note
40
here.
feet of frontage, for example, on a 200 feet deep, I meet it. No, you don't, because we're talking about the width.
Yep. I'm gonna just make sure that it's defined properly so that the intent is wide along the road.
So maybe that's the
Just
additional text.
Clarify there.
Right, wide along the road.
When you're ready, Sarah, I had a question on 2.30.
No, just a second.
No
230, yes.
So I understand the intent here, but to me, it literally says you can't remove topsoil, period, unless it's done in association with Article 6 extractive industries. But I mean, if you build a house by definition, you're taking off topsoil to lay your foundation.
Article 6.
But usually you put the topsoil back, right?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. And you don't when you have a
Change the
an
grade.
asphalt driving or changing the grade or, that's why, I mean, I think what
Okay.
we're trying to do here is just prevent people from stripping the
Right.
land and selling it.
Yeah, I don't know anywhere that you can tell somebody you can't strip from topsoil. You guys? Really?
On a protected dune, technically,
There
that
you
would
go,
be,
right.
that would be one area, but
I agree with that one, but anybody's lane, as long as I'm not gonna, I guess, force undue pressure on my neighbor, and just run free falling onto somebody. Because, yeah, we have to do topsoil,
well,
So
I guess maybe like if somebody bought 40 acres and just went in and just stripped all the grass and everything, it was nothing but a big old giant sand pit there, and then the dust kicked up every time the wind came up. Seems like something like that would be termed as mining under this definition here. So that would be saying somebody would do that because they're trying to sell the topsoil somewhere. So the question is that something we'd want to prevent?
So what if I just talk about topsoil removal, commercial topsoil removal? Because if it's personal, you know, if you're not going to strip, well, maybe you're going to strip your 40 acres and sell it to somebody, an excavation company. I mean, but that's kind of more of a commercial, like your sole purpose of stripping that property is to sell it to make money.
I got a question for you. So, as an example, I stripped 13 acres of topsoil for the reason I put a pond in. So I put a 2-acre pond in, I have to take 13-acre tract, I redevelop the whole thing so I can slope the water, get everything working the way it should be. And now I've got this monstrous topsoil plot to which I'm gonna sell topsoil. To recover the cost of the excavation and all the big pans and earth movers that just stripped off all my topsoil so I can make this work. I'm gonna use some of that topsoil. But to offset the cost of the development to build this on,
You know, they only do that in Ohio and Indiana. We don't do that in Michigan.
right, because we have clay.
Right.
I just don't think you can, there is no way I would feel morally right to tell somebody you can't take that topsoil off that ground and sell it. I mean, I understand where you're coming to. I mean, I'm, they just stripped it. and now
I mean,
what do you do?
That's a part of like a development to me, though. You know, you creating this pond and doing that work is, your sole intention isn't to strip the topsoil. Your topsoil is a byproduct of the work that you just did,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, I had to do that to get the slopes and everything right, all that water so it could run to that pond, because it was flat land, right?
Mhm.
And now, because of the,
Right.
costing $10,000 for 2
And
pans to run for about 3 days.
And I certainly get where you're coming from, because I struggle with it too, because I don't like to be told what I can and cannot do in general. So, because it makes me think like trees. You know, can you, if you have R1, can you just, in your big old chunk of land, can you just rip all the trees out and sell them? In township, I don't think you can or cannot.
You can.
You can't.
Yeah, right.
Because on the bay, you can't, because it's protected dunes, so you can't, but that'd be different.
Yeah, so then here again, that would be
Yeah.
something else where somebody can, they go clear cut those trees, we know where the places are, to recover some of the cost of the investment they're putting into it. You know what? I look at it this way. The next person could have bought that land, and that person could have bought that land, and they didn't. And now somebody came in and did what we didn't want to have happen, and it happened all the time. You know, somebody didn't want that in their backyard, and somebody came in and it's like, who'd you?
Was this ordinance always in? What's the history of it? What's,
I'd have to double check.
what are we trying to
Yeah.
prevent or accomplish?
I do know that the whole cutting down all the trees, that came up more recently, the concern about that. I don't remember anyone ever being concerned about the topsoil. But I agree that you're not alone and that there's plenty of at least men in this area that would say, you're not going to tell me what to do with my dirt.
I probably, if I with the vote, I would vote that one out. Remove topsoil.
Or it's somewhere and written some different way. I mean, to me, it seems like it's intended to confront environmental degradation. So is there some
It sounds that way.
Yeah, but the
Right.
way it's written is, we're going to control what you do on personal property. So does it belong in a different section, or is it in a different section where it says, look, if you do this, then there's some remediation, or there's some mitigation for the impact, whether it's dust or, it seems odd in this section, and how simply it's written, I think leaves it to interpretation as to what it's trying to accomplish or what you can and can't do.
I think that would get into the soil water conservation district.
Absolutely. If it's over an acre, then you're gonna have to get a soil
Right.
erosion permit and you're gonna have to stabilize the
And,
property.
it's a, worst case, maybe this applies to 10 acres or more, or something that, as opposed to my quarter-acre lot, I can't really
Right.
move a 10 by 10-foot section, put something in, because that's what it says you
Right.
can't do.
Right, I know.
There's something that needs to be done with this. I don't know if
Right.
it's
I mean-
complete removal or rewriting or move to a different section where it's applicable to certain
do you
things, but
think?
if it's,
Some reason that we specifically put it in there, but wasn't there before, and what problem terms. I do think, and Bill, you said it well on the whole, it kind of goes back in the whole master plan, preserving the resources, preserving
Yeah,
what's kind of like around here, so that there's always this balance. That's why I was kind of okay with mining, because when you think of, I first read that, okay, mining, you think of giant open pit mine somewhere.
Mhm.
But if it's going to time,
Yeah, I mean, I'm slightly indifferent to it, honestly. I mean, if you,
well, no, sorry.
no, it's okay. What if I mean, I'll schedule it to be removed, but we will come back and revisit it as a, hey, we did this, are you still okay with that?
That's good. And maybe
Just
we
in case.
Check to see if there's a reason why.
Yeah, I'll run through the existing ordinance and then, and see, and it could be, like you said, Bill, maybe there's a spot that it covers it that makes more sense. It's not a standalone topic. So I'm happy to look through that. Sure. Cool. Okay. So that's the end of Article 2. It is also 7:30. Do you want to, what's the next one? Article 5 or, quick one. Let's see. 5, 11. 5 is a big one. I don't remember. 11 is nonconformities. So why don't we nope, that's not, that's 10. Zoning Board of Appeals.
So I have a question on ZBA.
Yeah.
Did the ZBA review that?
This is very similar to what's in their current one. They have not reviewed out of the draft. Do you want me to send it to them and have them take a look at it?
Well, that's a question for the product group here, and I think that they should be the first ones to look at that and say, hey, is this good? Because I know they've had a list of things that they want to clarify and so on. And I think that when they're proceeding, they look at it, they're comfortable with the standards that are in there, and they bring it back to us when they're comfortable with it. We work on other stuff in here. You guys think that's well, yeah.
Did anybody have any glaring flags that they had concerns about in the ZBA section, Article 11?
There was an increase.
Okay. So we just passed, are in the process of updating these standards. Sorry, I just kind of had a moment where I was like, we did that, right? We had that public hearing a couple weeks ago. So we'll update that once those get through the process. I was thinking I need to send them to the county is what happened. Got sidetracked. So that one we can come back to. Article 11, unless somebody has some major concerns, I'll
so
just,
your motion is have them review it first? I'd support that if it didn't have this whole zoning ordinance update drag on really long. So to
Yeah.
me, it'd be a matter of when could they do it?
They could-
Somebody's going to go first, us or them.
Yeah.
I read through it and thought, mostly what I thought was, looks pretty good, they know best. But I was also thinking, boy, this would be good to get done, as opposed to they'll look at it in September.
Yeah, well, that's a good point on the timing. I guess my assumption is that they can get it in the next 60 days or so.
Mhm.
Meantime, the next 60 days, we go review everything else, but they come back.
Yeah,
Because even if we reviewed it tomorrow and we were good with it, which I suppose we could do quickly, then, we'd still have to kick it, I'd still want to kick it over to them.
Yeah, somebody's got to go first. I
Yeah.
would think shorter than 60 days, but I don't know really what they're,
right.
to me,
I
to
can
me,
send-
getting to the end of all of
Yeah.
them would be, it should be our goal. That's a subcommittee of this commission. I mean, boy, we want to get this done. I'd want them to look through it faster than 60 days from now.
we can send it over. I think that it's something that, what I'll probably do is send it over to the members and just say, do you have any concerns? And then if there start to pop up something, actually have the ZBA as a formal body take a look at it. But if individually, they kind of look through it and they're like, hey, looks, that's not a formal review. I don't know if you want to have a motion that
When
comes
is their
back.
next meeting?
We were gonna do training in August. We weren't gonna have it as a public meeting, but I could put it on at the beginning or, do a quick meeting and then do
How about we
training
do
after.
this, because we're not going to get through it completely tonight. How about you take it to them immediately, see how quickly they can say, hey, we would like them to review it,
Mhm.
and let them decide, and tell them we're going to get back to it. We're going to get back to it in August, and see how quickly they can come back and tell us any major
Yeah.
issues that they see or any changes they want to make, and
Mhm.
propose those, and we'll bring them back, and then we'll
Yep.
incorporate them.
Okay,
I did have one question on it. As they're looking at it, the particular variances, there's been several of them that have come up. Had these been in place, how would it have, shifted or changed either their outcomes or their process? That would be a natural question they would ask anyway, but I'd be curious to see if this helps them or hurts them, because that's the big thing.
yeah. We're trying to make it as clean for them as possible. Okay. I think the next chapter too, the 13, I know it's administrative, but there's some amendments and rezonings and stuff in there, so maybe hold off on that chapter as well. Or do you want to try to get through that one? Or I guess, did anybody have a bunch of comments on 13 that would think it would take too long, or you want to just go through that real quick?
I'm looking now.
Yeah, so that's amendments and severability. So we do have amendments and we're working on this language. So I pulled the amendment we just went through and sent up is the exact same criteria language that's in here. I pulled it right out of here. And the only thing that this has that our current ordinance doesn't have is section 13.2, which is conditional rezoning. So this is something that's allowed under state law related to a rezoning, that the applicant can propose conditions to their rezoning. The township cannot ask them to propose conditions. The township cannot say, if you give us these conditions, we will rezone your property. It's kind of a one-sided, display of, if I do this, will you approve it?
That's dictated by the state.
Well, they just say that you're allowed to do it. The criteria and all of that is up to the township. And the process is similar to a rezoning request. It's just this conditional kind of conditions that they put on their rezoning. And so those conditions come in all kind of shapes and sizes. It could be limiting the use. So say they want to zone it commercial, but limit the use only to retail, not drive-throughs, or, the whole list. It could The rezoning could say, we want to zone it to multifamily, but we're going to limit the density to the same that's in single family or something like that. Or it could,
So I can't recall, once, if something is approved as a conditional rezone,
Mm-hmm.
is that what, does that permanently stay with the property until later? It doesn't,
yes.
the next owner doesn't get it different?
Yep, you record basically it's kind of like a deed restriction, basically an agreement with the Register of Deeds. So it does transfer, but the property owner or the township can rezone it at any time, as long as you go through the process. So the next owner could rezone it back to what it was before or do something else. And the township could come along and say, you know what, we don't want it to be conditionally rezoned anymore. So we want to
So,
change it.
so this section is all new because, right,
Right.
and we have to have it in here by state law. So I'm assuming with that,
Sorry, you're not required to allow conditional rezonings.
oh, you're not, okay.
If you decide that you don't like that, or you think it's a slippery slope that somebody's gonna come in and they want to, it's kind of a way around a use variance, honestly. We're not allowed to give use variances, and so they put this in. It is a tool for development, but it also can be difficult to deal with at times.
Kevin, this was, Steve Langworthy talked about this in that one deal I remember for a while. Seems like before this requires a pretty material discussion because it's a relatively big deal. And it seems like if we were to proceed with it, we'd want to make sure that whatever sections we put in here give us as much ability to manage it going forward as possible. So best practices or whatever you want to call it, as far as what this section would look like.
Yeah. I mean, you didn't ask, but personally, I really dislike conditional rezonings from a zoning administrator professional standpoint. Because you're not supposed to negotiate with somebody. They're like, well, what kind of conditions do I offer?
Yeah.
You're like, well, I can't tell you. It's like it falls, what happens is it falls back on staff because the planning commission can't negotiate. Staff's not supposed to negotiate, but it's like, well, if I put this down or this down, can you point to what, it just becomes this weird.
So is it the only reason you would have it to try and encourage more development?
Yeah, I mean, it is a development option. It is a tool that's in there. It's usually not used frequently. We have so much residential and so limited commercial areas. A lot of times I see more of a benefit of it when you have multiple commercial districts on your map, and maybe there's an area that's kind of in between two districts and you can justify it with your future land use map, but maybe there's something unique to it that you don't want to go full blown the other district. Like that's how I kind of see it more, as working between like rezoning to a little bit more intensive commercial district than what you currently are, but you're also limiting certain things. You're like, oh, that's compatible enough with the neighborhood.
What if,
So I read through it, thought it was well written, but what I'm hearing now, I just have a question, is having it in, provide the township, both the planning commission, the supervisors with more ability to define the conditions instead of less, or more ability to do it instead of staff?
Well,
didn't I just understand that that by definition, you can't provide?
Yeah,
The
because
conditions.
part of this conversation makes me think, I'd like to get a little more educated before I make any decision, but that'd be my first question, is this better for the township than not having it in? Because not having it in leads to more backroom decisions.
No. I think this, if it's not in the ordinance, then you don't have a potential tool for development of property or redevelopment of property. So it's
For conditional.
another way for somebody to be able to potentially use their property.
And we don't have a lot of those conditions really that exist,
Yeah, I don't know.
or potentially exist.
I don't know how often you would ever see one here. If it's not in here, there's nothing I can do without it being in the ordinance. And then the ordinance, it has to be done by the planning commission and township board, just like a rezoning.
So it's a tool for a developer more than a tool for the township. seems
Right.
like.
Right. It's a tool. Yes. It's a tool for the developer. Just sometimes you get in where there's certain conditions and the township really doesn't want to accept those conditions. And then you're ending up denying their rezoning request because you don't like the conditions they give. So it can set up potential kind of conflict between developers and the township.
Seems to me that one approach could be take it out for now. Just focus on, simplifying without it. Go through our master plan, know that this tool there, and as we get into the master plan and we see areas that we want to further develop or whatever it is, or make more conducive, then maybe bring it, we'd always put it in there later. And it just seems like, I don't, struggling for a compelling reason to put it in there right now.
But, I could find some additional information to
Yeah.
send over to everybody too and kind of have
Yeah,
you read through it and think about it.
I would like to learn more about it.
Sure.
I don't personally want to make the decision based on it probably won't happen here, to be honest with you.
That's fine.
I want to assume that it will, and therefore, is it a good thing to have or not? As opposed to, since it might not happen, let's not worry about it. I don't want to do that because I don't know.
I'll get you some more information on it.
We take a 3-minute break, or if not, I'm going to.
It sounds like you can do anything in 3 minutes.
We might be able to, I think we're about wrapping up.
I think you can do public comment and adjournment, actually.
Now we gotta wait 3 minutes.
We can still. It's time.
I do like your idea to keep it moving now, but it's still there. Move it on down. We can always bring it back with different ideas of facade. If needs be. Yeah.
Did you learn about it in that class too with Steve? Did he give you any paperwork related to it?
Well, we had solar points, 2 or 3 slides about it.
Oh, okay. I'll see what I can find. I bet it was a citizen planner program.
Yeah, and I think your idea is compatible with us doing the master plan, because I think we probably will see a reason why we have it.
Yeah.
Because the other townships that were there are doing some really interesting things, more with current lifestyle and that kind of thing, and I think that's how they're.
Well, yeah.
I'm thinking this is a connection.
Yeah.
I wondered if it would help you be more creative. I mean, because I feel like everyone in the township, well, not everyone, but a lot of people are looking for those opportunities to do more with their agricultural land. And
But yeah, it would be something that'd have to be supported by the master plan. Well, if you take a look at that and you find that section, either if you can scan it in or bring it in here and we'll scan it in and send it out to everybody.
It was a particular percentage.
Oh,
I went off the,
okay.
did one of the sections, but I'll go back and.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a tool, definitely a conversation to have. So we can come back to it, get you more information.
It was on my own acreage.
So I think, Sarah, we are now to the point where we're kind of running out of gas for the evening, almost 2 hours. So we did get through 1 and 2.
Is your mic on, Andy?
We did get through 1 and 2. 11,
11's going to the ZBA.
yep. And so we're going to come back and hit 5.
Yeah, I probably won't have the conditional rezoning stuff to come back to 13 for Wednesday, but, so we'll move 13 to a further out meeting.
Okay.
But we'll do 5. I can't remember the other ones that I said. I probably owe you an email.
1, 2, 5, 11, 13.
But for Wednesday's meeting.
Yeah, maybe if you could just, if we could just
Are you
re-forward and
prepped
just,
for Wednesday?
I'm here.
so Sarah, for Wednesday's meeting, if you could just send out an email like
Yes.
tomorrow, just so we know which
Yep.
ones to make sure we cover.
Yeah, I'll have to I'll get an agenda out tomorrow, so you'll know what sections.
Okay.
Wednesday. Okay,
Everybody else be here Wednesday?
I'll be here.
okay.
Cool. So we can keep going.
Yeah.
That's good. So with that, we'll close the main agenda topic for today and open it up for public comment. Have no public comment for the evening. So with that, we'll move to adjournment. I have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.